Hello and welcome to Seattle City Makers. I'm your host, Jon Scholes. Welcome everybody to our latest episode. I am not joined by a Seattle City Maker, but I'm joined by a town maker, Casey Roloff, who is the CEO of Seabrook, the Washington beach town that he and his wife Laura have developed over the last 20 years. And I got out to Seabrook last December for a weekend with my daughter. I had never been, and I was impressed, and we had a great time, and I really loved seeing what Casey had developed. And I was curious to learn the story of how he and Laura built this town from scratch on an idea that began in 2002. And so I invited Casey on one of his trips through Seattle to stop by and come on the podcast, because I think a lot of the principles that he's used to help develop and inform the town development are applicable to city making at a broader scale. Casey was a painter and then a home builder on the Oregon coast, and then in 2002 decided, along with his wife Laura, to create this town from scratch. They purchased 34 acres of land on the Washington coast because they saw lots of people from Washington and the Seattle area driving all the way to Oregon for a beach experience, and they saw a market opportunity. And today, Seabrook is 500 homes of all different sizes across 9 different neighborhoods, 18 parks, a town hall event space, spa, fitness center, hundreds of acres of mountain bike and hiking trails, an amphitheater, some great retail, restaurants, sports courts, etc. They've done a tremendous job of creating this coastal town. And Casey shares a story of how he did it, lessons learned along the way, some of the challenges they faced, talks about the principles he used to guide the design of the town, and also talks about what's next for Seabrook, where the town goes from here. And we put our 2 standard questions on the podcast to Casey, his first job and his perfect Saturday, both in Seabrook, and his perfect Saturday as well in Seattle. Hope you enjoy my conversation with Casey Roloff, the CEO of Seabrook. So we just jump into these.
Great.
Casey.
Let's do it.
So thanks for making time on your swing through town.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned in my email to you, I'd never been to Seabrook, embarrassingly, until I think it was early December. I went out for a little weekend with my daughter. Mm-hmm. It was just pouring rain for like 72 straight hours, as it should, in early December on the coast. So I knew what I was getting into. But we had like this delightful, cozy weekend, hit the bookstore, hit all the retail.
Did you get in the pool?
We did not get in the pool, and we barely got on the beach.
Okay.
Which, you drive all the way to the beach, and we didn't get to the beach. But we had this like great weekend, and of course I'd heard a ton about Seabrook and followed you a bit and the development, and it was great to see it for myself and to see it with her.
Cool.
She had a rough year, so it was a nice little getaway for both of us. And then I saw that it's 20 years.
Yeah.
And so it just felt like, this is a good opportunity to. You don't pretend to be a Seattle City Maker, but you're a
small town
maker, a Seabrook maker. And for those who don't know the origin story, and what's the origin story of how it came to be?
Well, kind of started way back. Met my wife my now wife in high school, and I was a flaky kid, and I literally barely graduated from high school. And
you grew up in Portland area?
I was born in Portland and grew up in Vancouver, Washington, in the suburbs, which is ironic because, again, we're building something so different than that. But anyway, met my wife. She actually grew up in a neighborhood called Sellwood in Portland, and we grew up in these totally different worlds because anything I wanted to do, I would ask my mom or dad, like, "Hey, will you drive me here? Dad, can you drive me there?" Like there was no real independence. Where seeing where my wife lived, it was like she could ride her bike anywhere, she could walk anywhere, to school, the grocery store, whatever, hop on a city bus. I was like, this is amazing. Like
freedom.
Yeah. And just thinking about just raising our own family, like I want to make sure that our kids have this kind of a lifestyle when they grow up. So, no development background, no construction background, which is actually a good thing because we were able to look at things through a new lens. So went off to community college, and then wanted to attend University of Puget Sound, but tuition was very expensive. So I, to help pay my way, I got a $1,000 Home Depot credit card and bought my ladders and my tarps and my brushes and all that good stuff, and made some flyers and just started painting houses. And we love the kind of before and after experience with the homeowners. And we just, from the very beginning, we love taking care of customers, whether it's painting a house or building a house. Like, we just love serving others, and no different than what we want when we're using our hard-earned money on something. Like, we want to be taken care of.
You were doing that work with your now wife?
Well, so I did the majority of the painting, but she would do all the trim work, all the really tricky stuff.
All the stuff
she was an artist, so
for.
Yeah, so all the detail work she would help with.
Did you make her do all the taping too? That's so annoying,
no, I like that part.
Really?
I like that part.
So tedious.
No, she was the finisher. I'd bring her in to like critique it and make sure everything looked right. But so then finished UPS at UPS, and then I got a business degree. She got a studio art degree. And then the ocean was always calling us. So that was when we were always our happiest. And so we moved immediately down to the Central Oregon coast, Lincoln City area, kind of between Lincoln City and Newport, Oregon. And it was less expensive down there. The North Oregon coast was more expensive, Cannon Beach and Manzanita, places like that. And we didn't really know what we were going to do, but we had this little painting business that was actually doing quite well. And we knew we could make a living doing that, but that's not really what I thought I was going to end up doing.
The saltwater air is hard on the paint, so it's like the environment was good for business, right?
Yes, it was. And so I was also a wannabe architect, so I would sketch these little houses. And there was actually a book that came out in the 90s called The Not So Big House.
Yeah.
Susan Sasanka was the architect, and I believe she's like from Puget Sound, like Bainbridge or something like that. But maybe she's listening. But anyway. She taught the principles of building smaller spaces, more intentional design, and so that really resonated with us. And so started sketching these smaller houses, and then there was one that we were like, hey, we should try to build this thing. And so we went to the local banks and said, hey, would you loan us $150,000 to build this house? And they're like, you guys are, nice.
How many houses have you built?
Ambitious kids, yeah. But, this is too risky.
Were you wanting to build it for yourself or for somebody else?
Well, at the time, I think we thought we could build it for ourselves.
Yeah.
And we actually ended up moving into the house. And after like the first week, we were like, we can't afford this. This thing's for sale. But
you're house poor.
Yeah. So, but anyway, the banks wouldn't loan us money, but a doctor that I had painted houses for, their personal residence in their office building, I said, hey, do you know how we could borrow $150,000? And he said, yeah, we actually have this pension plan set up, and we do high risk real estate loans. And so at 14% interest. Now this is in 1995, so rates are about what they are today. And so we built the house, and shortly after that, it sold almost immediately, and the real estate community started kind of buzzing about it a little bit. And so they would actually bring us their clients, say, hey, would you design and build, this client a house? And we're like, yeah, we'd love to. And so over the next 5 years, we built like 25 houses or something like that. Not really knowing where it was taking us, but it was taking us somewhere. And so in 99, we started thinking to ourselves, like, it'd be so great if we could build a little neighborhood of our homes rather than them just kind of being sporadically, placed. And so we heard about this town called Seaside, Florida, this new town called Seaside, Florida. And like, this is amazing. What is this? Like, building a town? That sounds crazy. And the story of Seaside is the founders, Robert and his wife, Daryl Davis, these two amazing people, inherited this land. It was 80 acres on the panhandle of Florida. It was considered the redneck Riviera, southern Alabama. Nobody thought anything good would happen here. And they essentially looked around at all the new development over the past 50 years. And again, the 80s, so 50 years behind that, or before that, I should say. And they realized that like we were just not doing a very good job building communities. Mm-hmm. And they look back at the places they grew up going to, like places like Nantucket and St. Augustine and Charleston and all these historically amazing places that were super walkable. They had shops and restaurants and homes all nearby, lots of different types of houses. And they, again, came to that realization that we were so incredibly sophisticated in how we designed and built our towns villages, cities before the automobile. And we essentially took all that knowledge and threw it in the garbage can.
Lost our way.
When the automobile was introduced. And I think it was marketed as like Futurama, and it was all about larger lots and drive to everything and, suburban malls and
the cul-de-sac.
And cul-de-sacs. Yeah. Like the one I grew up
Do you
on.
grow up in a cul-de-sac?
Yeah.
Me too.
Exactly. So, and most people live their life that way now. And there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, we all turned out fine, and but it definitely left something to be desired.
Mm-hmm.
And so they designed this town. They've hired these amazing town planners, Andreas Dewani and Elizabeth Platter Seabrook, who's actually Andreas's wife. And they had been talking about this. They were teaching at University of Miami, and kind of theoretically. And then they had these developers that actually wanted to do it. And so they built Seaside. It was Design of the Decade in Time magazine. People travel from all over the world to see Seaside, and it became this massive success. So today, those the home prices there are just out of this world, and the shopping environment is also incredible. They've essentially curated this retail district that started with food trucks and like really small little shed buildings into this really vibrant town center. So they're averaging about $1,500 to $2,000 per square foot in sales. So just to, I don't know, that's probably like U Village numbers.
Right.
So we went down there and met, got to see Seaside first of all, and then another new town that was under construction called Rosemary Beach, and met the family. And Larry Davis was the brother of Robert, and he showed us all around and basically just, again, took us under his wing and introduced us to his brother and wife, Daryl. And they basically gave us the playbook on how to build a town. Like, hey, you guys are on the other side of the country. We can help you do this and show you the way. And so we came back, all fired up, and we were, I think, 27, 28 years old at the time. And we didn't just say, let's build a town from scratch. We wanted to start with a neighborhood. And so, again, we were down on the Oregon coast, and there's this 10 acres of land that was right between an RV park and a mobile home park. And most people didn't think it was very nice property. Most people thought it would be a trailer park or a mobile home park. And so we hired an architect that was involved with the same firm that did Seaside and Rosemary Beach, and his name is Lawrence Kamar, and we brought him on. He designed this beautiful little neighborhood. And then once again, we went to the bank and said, hey, would you loan us money to do this little neighborhood? We need $1.4 million. The doctors were actually my partners. They put in about $350,000 in equity. And then I think my wife and I put in like $50,000, but we still needed to get this loan. And so like, Casey, don't do it. We're going to save you from becoming a bankrupt developer. The average days in the market at that time were 270 days.
Wow.
Nothing was selling, glut of inventory, bankrupt developers everywhere. And I said, well, the reason nothing is selling is because nothing is being designed beautifully enough that people actually are compelled to buy. And we're going to design something that's going to really capture people. And they're like, yeah, get out of here. So a bank out of Southern Oregon loaned us the money. And the main reason they loaned us the money is that the partners had such strong financial statements. Like, hey, if this kid fails, we'll just go out. Yeah, we'll go after the doctors. So we thankfully that didn't happen, but we released the neighborhood. In the first 90 days, we sold out half the community, and in 4 months, we paid off the bank loan. And so that's when I looked at my wife and said, Laura, like, this is huge. Like, people are so thirsty for this. If we can sell in this kind of a market environment, this is something that really captures the people in the Northwest, and we need to build a town from scratch.
Were those full-time residents or people buying vacation homes?
Mix of both.
Yeah.
So it was probably like 2/3 vacation homes, second homes, and then about a third that were living there full time. And so that's actually also was the genesis of the starting our own hospitality company, because we realized that with Verbo starting in like '99, so we were just coming into that, and we saw that people wanted to be able to rent their homes. But we also knew there were a lot of problems associated with short-term rentals, and so we wanted to protect our neighborhood. So we basically built, guardrails so that our neighborhood neighborhoods could be really could thrive, and also guests and owners could live more harmoniously. So we basically started building the infrastructure and to support both full-time owners and guests, part-time guests. And so Bella Beach, really went kind of crazy after that. And then we thought we would be on the Oregon coast. We just had our first daughter, and we in college would go to Olympic National Park, and we did some camping trips and some backpacking trips, and we were just like so blown away by how beautiful the Olympic Peninsula was, and especially along the ocean in Olympic National Park. And we just started thinking to ourselves, like, why are all these people from the Puget Sound driving down to the Oregon coast, even on the central Oregon coast? I mean, they're driving like 5 hours.
Right, you go down to Cannon Beach if you live in Seattle.
Yeah, and they would even go further. And so we wanted to understand that. And when we actually looked at the Washington coast and studied U.S. Census data, we found that there was over 5 times the household wealth within a 3-hour drive and over double the population. So we couldn't understand why Seattle didn't have this amazing beach town that they could drive to. I mean, San Francisco has Carmel, Portland has Cannon Beach, and Seattle, there just really wasn't a good answer for that. And of course, it scared me to death because, like, why? Why hasn't this happened?
Surely somebody's
what am I missing here?
Yeah.
And so the main, we've kind of identified 3 reasons why people were skipping the Washington coast. Number one, the southern Washington coast is the developed area, Long Beach, Ocean Shores, Westport. They were built on very low elevation and didn't have the topography that we're drawn to on the Oregon coast, and then the Olympic National Park, and even the Northern California coast. So it just didn't have that ruggedness, and the trees, hanging off the bluff, things like that. And so the second thing we identified was driving on the beach, and we're just like, God, I don't really like this so much. And so that to me was a real deterrent for why people were not coming to the Washington coast at the same rate as they were the Oregon coast. Then the third thing was just the built environment itself, because those communities, the southern Washington coast, was built in the 60s and 70s. Of course, it was just part of the development movement. They just created a very suburban environment.
And built around industry too, right?
Exactly. And so we're like, the Oregon coast had these older places. Like Astoria is actually one of my favorite places now. I mean, it was, back then it was not very nice, but what a comeback. I mean, that is such a cool town to go hang out in now.
More of the Main Street feel.
Yes. And the walkability and all that. But again, people were drawn to the ruggedness, and then also just the quaintness of like Cannon Beach's Main Street and Manzanita and places like that. So we knew that we could build the built environment. We had the knowledge now, and we had the inspiration that we needed. And so we were like, okay, if we find the right piece of property, and so basically all the stars aligned. We found this incredible piece of property. We're located about 100 feet above the ocean. So we have these incredible panoramic views and some rocks up to the north with Point Grenville. And then secondly, the beach was actually protected, which was just kind of pure luck. But 6 months out of the year, you can't drive on the beach. And the times of the year you can, like right now in the winter, it's very difficult to get on our beach. So the only time you really see a car on the beach is when there's a clam tide or something like that. So it's actually kind of fun when there are big clam tides. And then the third thing was, again, the built environment. We knew that we could build it. Then there was the fourth element that I was worried about. It's like, it must be the weather. Like, that's why people are going to the Oregon coast. And there's this fallacy that the
Is it
weather,
any better down there?
Was that, no.
Is it any better?
No.
Yeah.
There's this fallacy that the Oregon coast weather is better, but actually it's the built environment that's better. Yeah. And when you're in a beautiful built environment, you don't worry about the weather so much, because you can shop and eat and just have a good time, grab a beer with a friend, whatever. And it's
part of the atmosphere.
Exactly. And I've been reading a lot about lately that because we all, especially from Seattle or the Northwest, we talk about the rain and sunnier locations. But when you actually start researching it, the happiest people in the world are not in sunny locations. It's a total, again, fallacy that sun makes people happier. But you look at the Norway and the Netherlands and Switzerland, these are all places that have weather that is the same as ours or worse. and yet they're very happy. And the reason for that is primarily the built environment. Again, the being able to walk, having shopping, eateries all around, community, building strong connections with your neighbors, just better citizens because of the way that the built environment is constructed. And so, so all the stars aligned. Then the final piece was actually there was no public sewer or water available up until 2000, and the federal government had just put in a brand new system. And the other thing that's interesting too that a lot of people don't know about is that Pacific Beach, which is just north of us, I mean, that should have become the Cannon Beach of the Washington coast. It was actually designed with like a grid, streets and lanes crisscrossing. But the federal government actually took Pacific Beach off the map. They basically put a Russian submarine surveillance system out there, and they literally had Pacific Beach removed from the map, and it shut down the main street. Because it was they wanted it to be top secret, and they wanted it to be kind of blacked out.
So that's
why it's dubbed the Hidden Coast.
Oh, interesting.
So anyway, just a lot of interesting things that led to it, but we had all the pieces in place to build a great town.
How did you go from being able to, you made a decision and built a neighborhood that didn't have retail and a town hall and all the other things to sort of say, oh, we can build homes that people like, to we can build a town which includes a bunch of other things that people are going to like and want? Like, how did you have the confidence and clarity to be able to make that kind of move?
It actually made so much sense there, because there was nothing there. I mean, when we first came out to the property, I mean, we were blown away by the natural beauty, but when you actually looked at the numbers of the cars that are driving by, it was less than 400 a day. Now, where we were on the Oregon coast, it was 15,000 a day along Highway 101. And that would usually scare most developers away. Like, there's no one coming out here. There's probably a reason why. And at that time, we decided, like, well, there's this thing called the internet, and we're going to create our highway, via the internet and get people to know about this place. But I'm sorry, I forgot. I kind of
just going from the neighborhood on the Oregon coast to like neighborhood to a town. Like, we're going to be town makers now.
Yeah. So it needed everything, right? Yeah. I mean, like, there was nothing it really didn't need. And that was the, kind of the exciting part. And because we had seen it done, we just knew that we could do it. When we launched Seabrook in 2004, 20 years ago, we had 350 reservations. There was a national article done in Coastal Living magazine that we, built this little neighborhood and that we were going to build this town. Well, people from all over the country were calling us, and wanting to put money down. And most of these people knew about Seaside, Florida, because it also talked about the connection to Seaside. This was basically going to be a Northwest version of Seaside,
So you were able to give people sort of a vision of what you were looking to create.
And so they saw it as like the next big thing for, from a beach town perspective. And it was super exciting, super crazy. I didn't know. I describe it as kind of like being a Little League All-Star and thinking you really got it going, and then going to the pros and just getting absolutely clobbered. We got crushed when we started. I mean, I had everybody was seeing that this place was going to be an absolute disaster and a failure. And so all of the contractors and engineers, they're like, hey, let's get as much money out of this guy as we can.
While we can.
While we can. And I really was just way over my head. So we I think our first 17 houses, we lost like $2.2 million. Whew. Yeah. So not a great start. And, but again, we had all this momentum. So we're like, okay, we got to raise prices. So that helped get us out of that. But, it was very scary there in the beginning. And again, we went to the banks and said, hey, would you loan us $9 million? To get this thing started. And actually, my wife and I were able to put about $2.5 million into the town, or buying the land from the beginning. And that was the proceeds from our last neighborhood. And so we basically owned the land free and clear, but we still needed to borrow about $9 million to get the first phase going. And I mean, again, probably 20 banks rejected us before we found someone crazy enough to loan us the money. But we actually, that bank loaned us money for almost 18 years.
Another Oregon bank, or
it was actually a Vancouver, Washington bank, and like they were very loyal to us, and we were very loyal to them, because the second home industry is probably the highest risk sector of real estate. It's kind of a need, it's a want, not a need. And so that's why so many, if you look at like Bend, Oregon, and the Oregon coast, and even Suncadia. I mean, Suncadia is on their 6th developer. So literally, hundreds of millions of dollars have been lost before anybody makes any money. And so thankfully, I had the mentors of the Seaside founders, and they said, Casey, we're not only going to help you build a town, but we're going to make sure you're the first developer and the last developer. And what that means is we want you to take a slow and steady wins the race approach, rather than coming in and borrowing tons and tons of money and taking, really sticking it out there. We're going to have you do this more cautiously. So we've done it very incrementally, slowly, and intentionally. And our owners really appreciate that, because we're protecting not only our own investment, but also their investment.
I imagine that helped you weather the Great Recession in 08, 9, 10.
Yes.
And make it through.
And that was
to not get overly leveraged, 6, 7 as you.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was the ultimate test, right? And most people thought, oh, this little beach town, they're going to get crushed in this thing. Well, it showed how much pent up demand there was for not only a place to come and vacation on the Pacific Ocean, but also a place that, again, had these really well-designed streets and neighborhoods. And so we sold right through the recession. I did raise some capital during that time from our homeowners, because they were believers. And we basically were developing out of cash from 2008 through probably 2011. Because banks were shut down. I mean, they couldn't do it. They were in worse shape than any developer. And so that really helped us weather the storm, and we came out of that. And so it was a very challenging time, but it was also very rewarding that we were actually outperforming the market like we were.
So you've had all kinds of success and a lot of attention, and the homeowners have done well, and people from this area and others have, loved to make Seabrook a part of their regular vacation plans. And then you have had some folks that are critical of their experience there. They call it Pleasantville or the Truman Show or Desperate Housewives meets the beach. You've heard all of these. How does that sit with you? How do you respond to some of the critiques of what you've created? And I think some people, to be fair too, say like, I wanted to not like it, and then I went there and I liked it. And so I know you get that.
Yeah, I think it's actually the most fun. It's the most fun to see people kind of have that initial feeling, or they actually want to not like it, before they get there. And then they end up like, this is, better than I thought. But I think that it's has more to do with the fact that 99% of the people out there have not seen a town get built from scratch. So I like to think about, when Queen Anne was getting built, or when Madison Park was being built, or when Green Lake or Ravenna was being built. There were people probably kind of snickering then, going, who are these people building these beautiful houses and these beautiful streets and neighborhoods?
It all goes so well together.
And parks, yeah. And because before that, it probably was a lot less sophisticated. But when these neighborhoods were built, and again, Seattle was built, a lot of people were probably thinking, who are these people? This, it's outlandish that they're doing this, or thinking they can do this. So it's really just more of an educational thing, because we are so numb to suburban sprawl, cul-de-sacs and, streets full of, 4 different floor plans and 4 different colors of beige, that when we see something actually being built like Seabrook, it can people go 2 ways. They're like, oh my gosh, how charming and adorable. And then some people are like, is this some kind of cult, or is this some kind of, what is going on here, right? And a lot of that also is driven by the architecture, but it really starts with great land planning. The architecture is secondary. So Seabrook could be all modern architecture, but the basic fundamentals of any great place are, number one, meeting the basic needs of a resident within a short walking or biking distance. So you feel silly getting in your car because it's so convenient to walk or ride your bike. That's number one.
Yeah, this 15-minute city concept that
Yes.
gets talked about as new as
Yeah,
a couple thousand years old, right? You were thinking about it in '04 when you designed this
again,
place.
we were learning about it. And what I love about my job is that we're just learning from the past, and we're not inventing anything. We're just learning from the best places in the world. But again, it was walkability, having diversity in housing types. It used to be that everyone lived within a small town structure, whether you were wealthy or whether you weren't wealthy. And what happened in suburban development is that we started to segregate people based on their demographics. So if you were a first-time home buyer, you lived in this neighborhood with other people like yourselves, first-time home buyers. Move-up buyer lived in this neighborhood. The over 55 community, the luxury community. Grandma lived in a nursing home, and we all drove to the suburban mall. I mean, that's
where we mixed.
That's the neighborhood that we grew up in, right?
Right.
And so where our towns were so much more diverse, so much more interesting, when we had lots of different housing types and places that you could live within the town itself. So you come out to Seabrook, like for example, Seattle, it's all about the ADU right now. Everybody should have an ADU. Well, we've been building ADUs for 25 years. And so a lot of the people that work in Seabrook actually can afford to live in an apartment above a garage and walk to work or ride their bike to work. So it's like building in workforce housing into the town itself. The third principle of the greatest places in the world is actually building around a transect. So that's like the built environment to the natural environment. And as humans, we want both. We want the best of the urban creature comforts, but we also want the best of the natural environment, having lots of open space and elbow room. And so essentially the transect is the transitions between that urban and natural environment. That's what also shapes the pedestrian experience. So when you're walking down the main street and you continue to walk out, everything is changing, everything is morphing. Concrete sidewalks are morphing to oyster shell pathways and then to chip pathways. The architecture also goes from a more formal design out to a more natural design. And we tread more lightly on the land as we leave the town center. And again, talking about all the places around Seattle, I mean, Seattle is basically a patchwork of towns all overlaying one another. And that's what every great city is it's patchwork of towns. And then eventually one area decides, like, let's go big, let's go up and create this metropolitan environment. But they all started as these more horizontally proportioned towns, small towns,
city
connecting.
Villages here. Yeah.
Exactly, or more of that 15-minute city idea.
Yeah.
But again, these basic, fundamentals are what made the greatest places. And the transect is, again, one of the things that most people don't talk about. Most people don't. I mean, people understand walkability. People understand having mixed uses and different housing types. But the transect is something that most people have not heard much about. Now, if you look at the best West Coast towns, like smaller towns like Bozeman, Montana, Park City, Utah, Carmel, Santa Barbara, the countryside has now been redeveloped as suburban sprawl. So you can get that town experience, and then the towns themselves are very cool, but you lose that countryside. So what is going to make Seabrook so incredible in the future is that we're preserving 70% of our land for public space and preservation. So you'll have all of those urban creature comforts, but that land around it will never be redeveloped into anything else.
That's so true. So many of these mountain towns that really have existed for quite some time as a town centered on a main street are now encased in suburbia that you've got to sort of penetrate and get through in order to have that mountain town experience.
Exactly. So that's why we go to Europe or to a lot of like really old towns, because they've actually, I don't know how they did it exactly, but they've preserved their countryside. So you can have that full experience from urban to nature. And it's amazing. And most people don't know why it's so amazing. They just walk around and like, why is it so magical here? But it's all of these four basic fundamentals. And the fourth one is actually civic public spaces. So what happened in suburban development is we stripped out also all of the civic and public spaces out of our neighborhoods. So it's more about my lot, my house, and civic spaces are like basically third places. First places where you live, second places where you work, and the third place is where you want to hang out with your friends, right? And those were stripped out of our neighborhoods. And so interesting, piece about that is that's why also our houses have exploded in size over the last 100 years. So because we've basically been trying to compensate for the lack of having third places within walking distance of our home. So now we have theaters and gyms and coffee shops in our houses because you can't walk to those places anymore. But when you live in a place that's really walkable, you need probably half the size of the home that you would if you lived in a suburban environment. So, but having those third places, the parks, the coffee shops, the pubs, the bookstores, the libraries, all those types of places, that's what really makes an amazing community. And that's where we get together and connect.
And I was struck by the quality of the retail, the food and beverage that you've created there. And the tavern, the wine bar, the Mexican spot, the market, the bookstore, and you sort of walk around and you kind of scratch your head of like, how do these places make it all year in a place that's got to be fairly seasonal?
Yeah.
And to have that of quality of retail, what's been your approach and secret to success in getting such great retail in that spot?
So it starts when you build a town from scratch. You have to incubate the retail. So it starts with like Saturday markets and music events and art walks and things like that. And there's pop-up tents. Food trucks can come in. So all of our restaurants started as a food truck. I think there's only one that hasn't started as a food truck. And so they actually are able to build their story within our town, starting, bootstrapping their business.
Build a brand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so in that incubation process.
Did you subsidize them to come in there, or did you just say,
some of them
hey?
did, but I think people are shocked. You'd be shocked how little we've subsidized the retail. And that's because we've done it so slowly and incrementally. So, Pike Street Market is such a great example of where businesses can start, with very little and grow into a household name. That's exactly what we're doing with Seabrook. So starting very incrementally, now they move up to what is a temporary building. So we have, when you were there, you probably saw some buildings that look kind of cheap. Well, that's because they're temporary. And then the actual brick and mortar storefronts, those are permanent. And that's the third phase of that incubation process. So once they reach a point, like Coco's, if you ate at Coco's there, they are about to double their size and move into a permanent brick and mortar storefront. But they started as a food truck, then they moved into a temporary building, and now they're moving into this beautiful new space that looks straight out at the ocean. And it's double the size. But the sales that these guys are doing are incredible. Even though it's seasonal, they're doing between $1,000 and $2,000 a square foot.
Wow.
And they're just getting started because we're only 1/4 built out right now. So most of our restaurants have all gone through an expansion. So Coco's is the last to go through an expansion. Frontager's, our pizza place, doubled their size. Vista doubled their size. But the reason Vista, our little bakery, if you haven't been there, we have 2 pastry chefs from Seawolf Bakery. The number one bakery in Seattle. They were able to move out there and start a business with very little money and create an incredible experience. And so now they're growing and expanding. And our job is to basically curate the best entrepreneurs, restaurateurs that want to be a part of something really special. There's another great business. They were actually in Winslow, Bainbridge? Magnolias. It's a little, it's a ladies' store. Well, she was in Bainbridge and moved it to Seabrook. And most people would think, oh, why the heck would you do that? You're crazy. She's actually outperformed her Bainbridge store in Seabrook. So while it is seasonal, they're able to, the times when they are the busiest, they're able to generate enough. These are annual numbers that we're talking about, not seasonal numbers. So they're able to generate a pretty tremendous bottom line number, even seasonal. Now we're going to become less seasonal as the town center really fully matures. We're only halfway done with our town center. So right now we have a list of businesses that want to move into our town, but we don't have enough Main Street space to provide for them. So there's a lot more demand to start a business in Seabrook than we actually have space for right now.
What was the story in getting the market? Because that's fairly new, if I have that right.
Yeah,
the grocery,
the
which I imagine people were clamoring for
Yeah.
10 plus years ago of like, let's get us a grocery, especially homeowners.
So
right?
once again, it had to grow incrementally. And so we had a little pole barn building, and that was called the Front Street Market. And actually, one of the couples that ran that business, they have another business that's very successful called Seaworthy Home, and they also ran the little market and did such a great job for us and met all of our basic needs for the first, probably 10 years. And then they running a grocery store is not easy. It's it's like at the restaurant business. It's not easy. And so they kept their one business, Seaworthy Home, and then they decided they were entrepreneurs. They did some other businesses, but we found a larger grocery operator, and they actually had a beautiful store, brand new store in Cannon Beach, and they also had a store in Manzanita. So they understood the seasonality of our town, and they also understood the kind of quality that people expected when they came out there. Then we also hired the architect that's designed most of the metropolitan markets and Ken's Market and some other stores here in town, PCC markets. And we invited him out to basically design our grocery store. So it's not the kind of experience most people would expect when they go out to the beach out, what feels kind of like the middle of nowhere. It's a pretty high quality grocery experience, and they're doing really well. And they're excited to be a part of the town.
So you've got, I think, 4 daughters, right?
Uh-huh.
So what do they think of what you've done here? Of like my dad and along with your wife.
Yes.
My parents made a town. I mean, like if I put like a cabinet together and I call my kids in to see like the cabinet, I feel like accomplished. And they got to tell them like, oh, the drawer doesn't work right because I didn't put that part in, and don't touch it. But whatever. Like you made a town, not a silly little cabinet or little project like I would be doing.
And fortunately or unfortunately, they were the guinea pigs, right? Because
they've grown up with the town.
Yes, they've grown up from the very beginning, and it was interesting because in the beginning we had a house in Olympia, and I initially said, I don't want to move the kids, and Laura and I decided together that we would basically live in Olympia, and then I would drive to work, and run the town. And we wanted to, have our kids live in a different environment. And so then I actually ran into there's a new town just outside of Atlanta, Georgia, called Serenbe, and I went and visited it there. And they started about the same year we did, and their daughters were older. And I met one of the daughters, and I was like, "Are you crazy? What are you doing here? Like, you've already gone up to college, and now you're back. Like, why are you here? Like, with your mom and dad's town?" And they're like, we couldn't wait to get back. Like we went to college, we got jobs, and we experienced what it was like out there. And we knew what our parents were doing was really going to be something special. And the quality of life that you can live here is just really unique. And they had to kind of experience what it was like outside of that place. And they came back, and they all work there and are a part of the town, and it's their home. And so when I saw that, I called my wife. I was like, Laura, I think we have to move out there. Like, I think that actually it's going to be the best thing we could do for our kids. And sure enough, our kids have grown up in this environment where they were able to be very independent. They could walk to everything. They could ride their skateboard to school or their bike to school. And it sounds like this utopia, but that's the way our ancestors lived. Like, it is unusual compared to the suburban world.
Yeah.
But this is more normal. The way they grew up is actually more normal than the way you and I grew up in this last 100 years. And so they had all sorts of little businesses. They were little entrepreneurs. One of my favorite stories is my 8-year-old daughter, who's my youngest. One day I was in the sales office walking out, and it was very busy Saturday market day. And I saw my daughter there, and she was exchanging money with some parent with a little child, and she was 8, and she had rolled up the red wagon with her sister's glitter tattoo box and a cash box. And I immediately got on the phone with my wife, and I was like, hey, because I was working, and I was like, Laura, did you know Megan was up here? She's like, I had no idea. And makes us sound like we're like not very good parents, but that's the kind of safety and independence they've been able to grow up with. But the most beautiful thing was that the parent was actually teaching our daughter how to exchange money.
Yeah,
because we weren't teaching her. I mean, maybe we did one time, but she needed a little lesson on that. And this parent was actually helping her exchange money. So
The super early stages of your retail incubation right there.
yeah, exactly. So to see them have that kind of an experience, and I mean, you've never seen more lemonade stands than what you'll see in Seabrook in the summertime. And now some people might just scoff at that and go, "Oh gosh, that sounds so fake or phony." But the more time you spend there, the more you realize like this actually is real. This is not a movie set. These are real buildings. It's not Disneyland. But it's just I describe our town right now as like a high school, or I should say a teenager, an awkward teenager. And we're still finding our way. We're still getting our feet on the ground. But over the next 5 years, our town is going to fully mature and be completed, the town center. And that's when we'll really have arrived. And that's when Seabrook will be put on the map.
We have got a couple of standard questions to conclude here, Casey.
Great.
What was your first job that you drew a paycheck for?
So my parents had a little video store in the early 80s. And so I basically loitered in this strip mall, and I would go to the arcade and the pet store and all this.
You really did grow up in a suburban setting, didn't you?
I did. And
was there a nail salon on that strip
was
mall?
that?
Was there a nail salon?
Oh, yeah. It was all
Teriyaki
there.
joint?
And so I was spending so much time in this pet store, the owner started to get annoyed. And said, "Hey, you want to clean some bird cages?" So I ended up I cleaned all the bird cages, and I would clean all the fish tanks. Both very nasty jobs if you haven't done that work before. But I was 12 years old, and I was loving it. Like I enjoyed it, and pretty soon I was working on the floor and doing the sales side of it too. And so it was actually a great suburban experience. Like where my kids did the lemonade stand and these other small businesses. I did have that suburban experience where I was able to become get those entrepreneurial juices flowing at an early age. So that's when I knew I loved, again, serving people, taking care of people, making sure they didn't buy something silly, bought something that was a good value. I've always taken that part really seriously, because when I spend my money, I don't want to waste it on something. I want someone saying what is a good value, what isn't a good value. Was
being around your parents' video store, was that helpful to you and having some interest or confidence on the business side?
Yeah,
of what you're doing?
It was.
Okay, I saw my parents run a business, and
it was not easy. It was in the early 80s when interest rates went to 18%. So it was a tough go, and I got to learn the hardships of running a business as well during that time. And my parents were such hard workers, but again, it was almost impossible to compete against the kind of economy that they were in. And so that I was always trying to think of ways to help their business. And I of course worked in their business too. I worked at the video store and the pet store. But it was challenging, and it wasn't until I graduated from high school that my parents decided to also move to the beach. And they kind of just they were flipping houses before flipping was, the term was used for houses.
Pre-HGTV.
Before HGTV, exactly. And so that was good to see them kind of transition from, working running a business in a strip mall to actually, working on houses.
They got out pre-Netflix and streaming.
Yeah. Yes. Well, that was the hard reality that they. Because when they opened their video store, it was like a big business. And then Blockbuster came along, and it just crushed all the small video stores. So they had to get out, and they transitioned nicely. So
our final question is usually, what's your perfect Saturday in Seattle? But what's your perfect Saturday in Seabrook?
Oh, well, they're both.
You can design it beginning to end.
Yeah, they're both good days. Well, most people know that that are in Seabrook know that I give tours on Saturdays. And so I usually give 2 tours, one at 11, one at 1 o'clock. And I basically share, the art of town building. And it's somewhat of a crash course on urban planning. And a lot of people, what I explain to them is hopefully when you're done with this tour and you go to the next great town or the next great city, these things are going to start popping out at you. They were very subconscious before, and now hopefully they stand out more. But I really enjoy doing that. And then in the off season, I usually take my Sundays and Mondays off. But I usually work a half a day on Saturday. Laura and I usually go for a long walk in the morning with our dogs, and sometimes the kids will come along. But So yeah, I'm usually I'm a working guy on Saturdays typically, and then we usually are getting together with our friends Saturday evening or family, and um, my mother and my mother-in-law also both live full-time in Seabrook. In fact, my grandma lived out there until she was 92.
Wow.
So we don't just talk about this. We really do believe that having more multi-generational communities are what really makes strong communities. So creating places where everyone can live is really important. And again, we're one of the only cultures in the world that don't live really close by to our parents. And so we've been really fortunate to actually have both of our moms close by.
That's great.
Yeah.
So I said that was the final question, but this will be the final question.
Okay.
What's next that you can share for Seabrook?
Well, the big push is just finishing our town center. So Seabrook is about to change exponentially over the next 5 years. And the reason for that is we built the critical mass up of people now, the number of homes, the number of people. Now they're just clamoring for more retail, more shops, more restaurants. And so this next 3 to 5 years is what's really going to transform Seabrook. We also have a new school coming to the area. So we have there's a $30 million fund for a brand new school. Our community foundation, which we started in Seabrook on day one, we've raised over $6 million so far, and we're going to be focusing on building a new community center, which would be either a Boys and Girls Club or a YMCA to serve the community outside of Seabrook. So our focus is from Tahola, Pacific Beach, Mo Clips, Copalis Beach, all of the communities surrounding Seabrook, and making sure that our youth in our community have all the opportunities possible. They have very limited opportunities right now, and we're really excited to make a difference there. And we're also really fortunate that the Bezos Academy or the Bezos Foundation came in and they put in a year-round preschool, and they want to also expand their operation there. And so we'll be working in partnership with the Bezos Academy and the Bezos Foundation.
That's terrific. Well, congrats 20 years in on
Thank
what
you.
you've developed.
I thought you'd be asking me a Seattle question because we love coming to Seattle.
Well, you can share your perfect Saturday in Seattle, too.
Well,
what are you doing when you're
again, this was our getaway, before COVID, of course.
Yeah.
Because we lived at the beach and we lived in this little town. So we take the kids to the city. And we, again, love Pike Street Market. We love the waterfront, taking the kids to the aquarium, just all the fun stuff here. And because we're so into urban planning, I mean, Seattle really is one of the most beautiful cities in America. And then having the backdrop of the Puget Sound and the Olympic Mountain Range, I mean, you don't get tired of that. So it's been really interesting to see what's happened since COVID and the things that, the challenges that all the big cities, especially West Coast cities, are dealing with right now. So it is, I was saying to James that, it's nice to see some of the green sprouts out there and that things are improving and strengthening. And it's hard to see our hometown of Portland and then also see Seattle go through what they've gone through, because this is everything we believe a great city should be, as far as the design, the planning, the architecture. The third place is having all those civic places. And so to see that, there maybe the right leadership wasn't in place to protect those things, because every business, and it breaks my heart to see, some of our favorite businesses here in Seattle, go out of business. And, our leadership's job is to protect those businesses. And that's what was it really failed in Portland. And I know that there's been a lot of challenges here as well. And so it's nice to hear about some of the changes being made there and really protecting these hardworking, business owners that make the city such a beautiful place.
Yeah, key to the fabric. And
Absolutely.
And and all the ingredients you spoke about and the lessons that you've applied in Seabrook are at a different scale than here, obviously, are all transferable and still, I think, very relevant. And it's not so much that we have to reinvent to get our cities and downtowns back. It's really about recommitment to what's always been true.
Yeah, I'll ask you a question. How do you feel about the changes in Seattle, and where do you see it going right now?
Good progress. I mean, I think we're headed in the right direction with still much more work to do. But I think, when we faced our challenges as cities and downtowns 60 or so years ago in the U.S. in particular, and the automobile and the highway system came about. We tried to imitate the suburbs because we saw that succeeding and winning, and that's where people wanted to be. And so, in our downtowns, we built structured parking and big one-way streets and inward-facing retail. And so I think our challenge here is just stay true to what people have always wanted, which is walkability, proximity, great, human scale storefronts and design, all the things that you've built in Seabrook that have been proven for thousands of years to be what the market and people gravitate toward. And so we just, and they got to be safe and welcoming, clean and delightful places as well, and great civic spaces. So if we stay that course, we'll be okay.
I agree. It's definitely going to come back. I think the thing that's been interesting is the whole office. So it was a double whammy, right? It was obviously this homeless crisis, and just not having a solution in place to take care of these poor people that are out on the streets, and to really give them better options and better pathways to either turn their life around or a place to live. But then seeing also the office is kind of this double whammy. So how do you see the office, recovering with people working 2 to 3 days a week in the city?
Yeah, I think it's very much still relevant, and just downtown is a place where people come to connect and gather and innovate together for work, whether it's in an office, a conference room, or the art museum, or a dinner, or a bar. I mean, those places that people want to connect in person are very much located in a downtown. I think the office is still very relevant. I think we're still going to continue to see, as we have in the last 6 months, increasing number of people returning. But we're not going to get back to 90 or 100%.
Yeah.
And so more of the trips to our urban centers are discretionary and not obligatory.
Right.
And if you create the right design, people will make choices to be in those places. And that's part of why I wanted to have you on, is because I think there's so much that's transferable from what you've done and the scale in which you've developed and designed and built Seabrook, and creating these social experiences, whether it's your 8-year-old daughter getting advice from somebody, or your in-laws helping your kids, or people bumping into each other. I mean, that happens in some places. It doesn't happen as often in others, in cul-de-sacs or
there's a great
malls.
piece I'll send you, and it's basically about how to get families to move back into the city, which right now, that seemed a lot more realistic 5 years ago, right? Or even past that. But there's a good list of kind of like do's and don'ts on how to really attract families back into the cities, to fill up buildings and to, fill up. I realize that like probably apartments and condos are pretty full right now. But if they're really going to be converting, some of these buildings into more residential property, because I think a great city has a lot of young families living in it, and I think that's something that if I were running the city, I'd be striving for, not just getting the the single or the couple that live downtown, but also getting families living downtown.
Yeah, kids on the street in the downtown,
exactly.
Give it a different character.
Totally.
Well, thanks for making time for this.
Yeah,
as soon as my daughter and I left in December, she's like, let's book a trip for the summer. So we're going to be back when the sun's out and it's not 38 and raining. But we had a blast when it was 38 and raining. It was a cozy weekend.
Well, next time you'll have to hit the pool because it's 85 degrees. And like people are swimming December,
January,
you're heating it year
February.
Round. Yeah, it's amazing. People love it.
Yep.
And there's a sauna, a big hot tub. There's also an indoor pool for but most people prefer the outdoor pool again in these last few months. So it's been neat to see that.
Yeah. Well, we look forward to our return visit. And
right on.
Well,
again. I told James, I said, you got to let me know when you're coming out. And
I will.
I'll put you up and let me know if you're coming out as well.
Will do.
Yeah.
Thanks,
cool.
Casey.
All right. Thanks, Jon.
Well, hope you enjoyed my conversation with Casey. Just a fascinating story of how a town gets built from scratch. And congratulations, 20 years in, for all the success that he and his wife Laura have had in creating a brand new destination for a lot of folks in the Seattle area. I know that I'll be back, and looking forward to getting out there on a weekend where it's not 38 degrees and pouring and blowing, but we had a lot of fun in those conditions, and looking forward to being out there on a sunny day as well, when we can spend maybe a little bit more time on the beach. So thanks again, Casey, for making time. I want to close out with the recommendation of something you got to check out here in downtown Seattle, and want to highlight the up and coming, soon to open, Museum of Illusions, which will open at 5th and Union in the ground floor of the Skinner Building, the old Brooks Brothers space, if you're familiar with that, just down the block from the Fifth Avenue Theater. The Museum of Illusions is an interactive museum. They've got 40 locations across 25 countries. First opened in 2015 in Croatia, and their Seattle location will open here soon. I don't have the exact date, but it looks like it's just around the corner. So check out the Museum of Illusions, an interactive museum coming to downtown Seattle. Well, thanks everybody for joining us on this episode of Seattle City Makers, presented by the Downtown Seattle Association with support from James Cito and production by Spark Creative.